Happy New Year. I am so glad to be here with all of you. And I know that you are in your places, and I hope it's with bright, smiling faces because the best days of our lives are still ahead of us. If we are here on this side of heaven, then we know that God still has good plan for us to spread the gospel and spread his news to those who need him, and those who need restoration through him. So I've been with Mortarstone for 5 years and in the stewardship and generosity space for the past 12 years. And I am so grateful that during my journey, I have had the opportunity to meet Brenda, who is here with us from Cuyahoga Valley Church. We met a number of years ago at a Christian Stewardship Network conference, and we have just really gotten to love each other, know each other, share some similar stories and backgrounds. Brenda is an expert in this field. So she started and launched a ministry. She has grown this ministry. She started her own Ohio Stewardship Network in Ohio. So if you're in the Ohio area, you need to look that up and check it out. And I'm going to actually just ask you, Brenda, to talk to me a little bit about the Generous Life Ministry and all the things that you've been able to do and co-labor with the Lord for. So I'm going to hand that to you.
Yeah, thank you, Megan. I share your excitement about this. I'm so happy that we get to talk about our journey as a Generous Life Ministry. I don't know if I'm an expert, but I'm certainly happy to share our story. Generous Life started in 2017. It's a much longer story than what we have time for today, how that all happened, but I got tapped to be the director of the Generous Life Ministry, and it was a result of going to the Christian Stewardship Network Forum down in Dallas at the time that year, and that kind of was the igniter for us at Cuyahoga Valley Church to start a stewardship ministry. And I'm happy to report we're still here. We're doing more than ever. It's been exciting to watch, especially since Megan, you and others at Mortarstone joined us a couple years ago. It's been a great journey, and we certainly have a lot ahead of us, but we also have a lot behind us that we've been able to do. And I'm grateful for the partnership that we've had to be able to do that.
Yeah, me too. This has definitely been a fun story in the making that we are going to be sharing with you as I am launching our topic and our PowerPoint for the time. So we are talking today about kind of some of the things Brenda and I have been able to connect with and work on in Mortarstone and with the church that we want you to have to be able to implement in your church this year to see kingdom growth. So our webinar topic is top 3 giving metrics to manage in 2023. And we are going to be looking at 3 reports inside of Mortarstone in the long term of this webinar so that you can as well follow along. And if you don't have Mortarstone, these 3 topics and metrics should still be applicable to you. So if you do have Mortarstone, you'll be able to find the reports inside of your software. If you don't have Mortarstone yet, you can get Mortarstone, but these are still metrics that are applicable to you and the things that you guys are going to be doing and moving forward in. So let's get started by understanding if we're going to talk about 3 reports that we can manage to, 3 reports that are going to measure the outcomes of the things that we're looking at. Let's be very clear about the objectives to managing these metrics. The objectives that we all have in anything that we do is inside of the church is that we've got to focus on growing the total number of givers, the total number of givers who are participating in giving into the kingdom ministries, into the kingdom life, and growing the total number of giving that is coming in through the door so that more ministry can take place. So a massive objective that all of us want to accomplish alongside one another is let's look at this from growing givers, growing that way, and growing giving. And so this is really the premise of where our relationship started, Brenda, and I'd love for you to be able to address that.
Yeah, thanks, Megan. So as I mentioned, we did meet, you mentioned, we did meet down at this Christian Stewardship Network Forum. And I kind of put that in the back of my mind because I was way back in 2017, brought it back to CVC, but we weren't ready to move forward yet. And then there was COVID, and COVID changed everything, and made us start to look a little bit deeper into how can we do a better job of discipling our people in the area of what we call investor. And so we began conversations with you and others, Megan at Mortarstone. And then early 2001, I believe it was February 2001, we started working together. And that was exciting for us because it started, as you remember, it was a partnership with you and Horizons Stewardship, and jointly, you guys were able to do an assessment for us, next level generosity assessment, that included surveys and interviews and a review of all of our data, and came back to us with 13 major milestones for us to move forward with. And that was the start of our work together, which was around the fall. It took a few months for us to get all that work done, and then we started moving forward in the fall. So just to put this in perspective for people, if I were you, I'd be wondering, well, how big is CVC and how does that compare to me? We're a church of 2 campuses. We have about 1,700 attendees on a weekly basis. About 1,300 of those are in person, 400 over the internet. And for 2023, we have a budget of 4 million, and we have been able to grow our budget over the past few years considerably, and our average giving per household has grown considerably. In the last 2 years, it's grown 24% with the things that Mortarstone has helped us do. So that's how we got started, and we have a lot that we can talk about the short time today, but I'm excited to be able to share some of the things we've done.
Well, and I think that you've nailed it, because you talked about milestones that came out of looking at it underlined stewardship and generosity principles. And so when we think of that, when we think of what are these milestones that come out of stewardship and generosity principles, we have to think about strategies that we're going to apply to this overall objective. Before we can even manage to it, before we can even look at the metrics that we want to manage. It's like you start by looking at the metrics, but you have to know the goal. You have to know that objective. And then you have to say, well, there's really strategies that are going to be existing for all the things we want to manage and all the things that we want to do and grow. And what I loved that you said too, Brenda, is you mentioned that this is for you all at CVC. You think about this as investors. And I think that you coined that phrase well, because we're actually in the business of people. And the business of people, if people are our investment, then people should be our return. And I think that the coined term of investor is absolutely what we're doing when we're looking at the objective of growing givers and growing giving. So knowing that and hearing a little bit about some of the beginning precursors of what we were able to accomplish with each other, we need to look at growing givers through kind of an operation assimilation strategy and how to think through that. And then we need to look at growing giving. And they're 2 things that are basically like 2 sides of the same coin. They go hand in hand, but we have different strategies that we're going to apply to both of these sides of the coin, so that out of it comes the full investment into the kingdom, if you will. So growing givers through an operational and an assimilation process and a standpoint, and looking at lapsed givers, was one of the major things that we have set out to make sure that we're doing from a ministry perspective about people with CVC. So I'd love for you, Brenda, to share about, when I think about operations and assimilation and looking at things through a lens in this way, we're really good as churches at noticing new people who come in the door and saying, let's get them plugged in, let's get them connected. We're really good when somebody new comes to a group as to saying, like, we're so glad you're here. Here's some other things about the church. Some of us are really good too at even saying, why don't you learn about the church by coming to these set of classes that we have? But sometimes we need to stretch ourselves and say, how else can we grow people and get them into the flow of the kingdom here at the church? And that is through an operation and assimilation standpoint of first and second time givers, which is an open door to growing more givers at your church. And then closing that door with lapsed givers by saying, we want you to be healthy and safe, and we want you to know that you're cared for, and we would love it if we're here alongside that journey. So I'm going to let you, Brenda, just talk about kind of the operations and assimilation processes and lapsed givers on the area of growing givers to an overall church.
Yeah, thanks, Megan. Let me start with, for the Generous Life Ministry, our overall objective. And that is to disciple people to become love-inspired stewards who not only believe that God provided all that we have, but that he retains full ownership, causing all of our decisions related to money and possessions to be in the context of seeking God's direction in the use of his possessions. Or more succinctly, managing God's blessings, God's way for God's glory. That is our overall objective in everything we do. And I need to put that on the table because I don't want this to sound like it's about money. It's not about money. It's about hearts. It's about changing people's hearts. And that's what we really want to do. We want folks to understand the 2,350 verses in the Bible about money and possessions and how that affects their life and their relationship with God. So saying that, a couple of things. At CVC, we have a very detailed and thorough budgeting process. So it starts with the budget. We're very good at monitoring that weekly, and we do that through Mortarstone along with other reports that our financial office creates. We're looking at a number of things. So if we think about all givers, we want to move, and there are a number of non-givers in the church. We want to move the non-givers to first-time givers. And we estimate about 40% of our attendees are non-givers. We do that. The strategy would be to have the teaching pastors communicate their desire and leadership's desire for people to become the love-inspired stewards that I just described, and create a communication strategy to engage them. And so we look to educate, we look to communicate, we look at why don't people give? I think it's two main reasons. They don't feel connected, and that's all about relationship. And they don't understand what the Bible says about giving, and that's about discipleship. So those are the two main drivers. We want people to come in, get involved, learn what CVC is about, find a place where they feel like they can fit and offer, use their gifts and talents for God's glory in a way that is pleasing to him. So that's about involvement and relationship. And then discipleship, we have a lot that we do related to this, to discipleship, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But our new giver strategy, you mentioned the first time givers, we like to write personal notes to thank them for coming, for giving, to encourage them to engage with us, and to let them know about educational opportunities. And that meets the relationship and discipleship side. And our core givers, the core givers are the folks in the middle that give a lot, but the top givers, actually, if I look at the numbers, our highest level of givers provide the bulk of our budget, but our core givers are the greatest opportunity for giving growth. And at CVC, that's about 74% of our giving population. And again, we want to disciple them. We want to have annual sermon series where we can teach them more about stewardship and generosity. We want to provide classes that help them understand that. And for our top givers really understand that they've been blessed and they want to give back to the church. They want to give back to the work that God is doing through CVC. And we need to just disciple that group in a stronger way. It's more about relationship with them than teaching them about stewardship and generosity, because they're already very generous people. So we want to provide more relationship for them. So those are some of the things that we think about when we talk about growing givers.
Well, and I think that you've hit some key points on that I want to reiterate, because I think that they're worth jotting down if you're taking notes. When we're talking about growing givers, we need more givers to be able to be generous towards the church or to start their giving journey towards the church. It is because we want people's hearts to be connected. And we are in the business of people. And so you mentioned this is growing God's money for God's way, for God's glory.
Mhm.
And that money is a second byproduct. I heard it best said by Daniel Rabbi Lapin one time. He said, money is a certificate that is earned when we've served one of God's children well. And as the church, it is our heart to serve those people who are coming in our door, whether they are a giver or not yet, to serve them well. But when we are able to serve them well and they have raised their hand, grows our giving base and gives us an opportunity to recognize them and to invite them further into the process of being a part of what we're doing in our local churches. And so you've nailed those things well, Brenda. And then you even hit on the fact that we've got, first-time givers, all the way to core givers, the way to top givers. Well, every top giver was a first-time giver at some point. And so we want to make sure that we are assimilating them in a way that they feel loved and shepherded, and that they know what the church is about, so that they are able to understand, hey, they don't want something from me, they want something for me. And that is genuinely what we want to communicate when we are assimilating anybody in through the fold because they raise their hands to give. So let's just talk real quickly about the operational process behind lapsed givers. If you can just share real quick on that, then we'll move over to the discipleship and education piece, which is growing giving. And we'll round out this whole webinar with looking at the reports.
Okay. So with the lapsed givers, people will stop giving before they stop coming. And so that is an indication to us that perhaps something is going on in their life that we need to come alongside of them and support them in. They could have lost their job. There could be medical issues in their family. When you have a bigger church, we're not a mega church, but we're big enough that people can get lost if we don't pay attention. And so it is a metric for us to know that it's time to make a phone call just to check in on people and say, hey, how are you? And is there anything we can do to help you? Is there anything going on in your life that, we can come alongside you? The challenge with this, while it is probably one of the most important things we can do, it takes time and resources. It takes people. And so that is a challenge to be able to have enough folks on staff that can make those types of calls and come alongside folks. But that's what we have in our strategy to do. That's what we've started to do. And we're going to be growing this as we move forward.
And I would just recommend, if you're thinking, how would we start a lapsed giver strategy, or how do we move in that direction? The things that you need to do are, Brenda said it does take time and it takes resource. It takes people, because it's care calls. So if there's any way that you can involve the pastoral care team, or even volunteers through the pastoral care team to just make phone calls to individuals, they do not have to know why they're being called, other than, hey, we just check in on our people from time to time. And we just wanted to check in with you today. How are you? Can we pray with you? And those are going to be some key things that you can involve other people in that would maybe want to volunteer in that effort. Or even if there's other staff members that could take 15 to 20 minutes and make 2 phone calls a week to just love on people in that regard and report back to your generosity ministry so that you guys can capture those stats and we can measure them on the opposite end. That's a good thought process to go through. So thank you, Brenda, for sharing that important piece about it does take time and resource, and it is important to make sure that we're doing it with that perspective. Let's shift gears and talk about this other part that's on your screen of how do you grow giving? How does that happen? And this is probably, there are so many different ways to think about this. There are so many different ways to address a topic. But the number one thing that we can do inside of a church is to do it through a discipleship lens. Just like everything else that we do, we want our people to be well discipled when it comes to the next generation. We want our people to be well discipled when it comes to marriage. We want our people to be well discipled when it comes to family. There are so many different things that we want everybody to feel discipled around: love and joy and peace. And we want that same thing in the joy of giving. We want people to be able to grow in the area of generosity and stewardship, and that will grow giving. And that is best done through education, relationships, and communication. So Brenda, I'd love for you to share about all of the different discipleship tools and education that CVC has embarked upon that fall into those 13 milestones and the different communication pieces that you use to grow giving inside of givers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the things that we first started doing, as I mentioned, we started Generous Life in 2017. We started with some basic classes that were inspired by some of the members of the board of directors of this Christian Stewardship Network. So we run several classes. We've been able to expand it a great deal over the years, especially with Mortarstone's help. But here are the types of things that we do. We have a class that we created in-house called Managing Money God's Way. It teaches about how to create and live off a budget and how to get out of debt, along with biblical principles behind that. We have classes on we have had classes on raising financially healthy kids, estate planning, generosity and legacy design workshop, which Mortarstone does for us, the tax smart giving Mortarstone does for us. We've held a class on Medicare that was wildly popular. I wasn't sure what to expect, but that one was very popular. Avoiding college debt, big one for us. We've done that multiple times. We started doing Journey of Generosity, the jogs through generous giving. That has been something that has made a huge difference for us. I'll just mention quickly that we ran 5 jogs earlier last year through the first 2 quarters of last year. 58% of the people who attended a jog, once they understood what God had called them to do, what the Bible says about giving and who owns everything, 58% of the people who attended that jog increased their giving immediately, and that giving has been sustained anywhere from 17% to over 100%. So that's something that we were able to, because it was a smaller population, we were able to really get some good metrics on that. On the other side, the communication side, there's so many things that we're doing. One of the biggest opportunities for communication is stories. So we have embarked on a strategy of including a story every week in the worship service related to how God has changed lives. And we are able to communicate to those attending that because you gave, because you served, because you prayed, we've been able, it's gonna make me cry, we've been able to do some fabulous things. We have some really cool stories about church plants, about missions work, our sports camp. The stories just go on, and they touch people's hearts. And people understand when I give, because so many people, they give out of obedience. They don't give out of a heart that really is joyful in giving or really understand why they're giving. But we're trying to connect the dots for them and say, when you give, this is what happens. So they can get excited about their giving. We've had what we call, we've changed the name a couple times, vision meetings. It used to be the annual business meeting, then it was the vision meeting, now it's the family meeting, but a time where we can bring the body together and say, and it's twice a year, here's what we've been able to do so far in the past 6 months. Here's where we're headed in the next 6 months. And it's because of you, because of your giving and praying and serving that we've been able to do this. So that's another opportunity for us, along with we send letters out with our contribution statements, again, with stories, thanking them for their generosity. So those are just a few of the things that we've been able to do in the last few years.
I love that. Obviously, I love your heart in that, and I think that we can all understand that, and we can all gravitate towards that, because those are the pieces that we're really trying to connect. And that is why the objective of growing givers and growing giving has to be about the business of people. So there are operations and assimilation processes that are functioning pieces of the back office, but it must connect to people. And then the byproduct is that if we are telling stories well, we are offering educational classes that are related to biblical truths about what God says about money. And then we are communicating the outcome of what's going on inside of our local church. The byproduct is, if people are our investment, then people are our return. So this is kind of the framework of when you think about, so what are those reports, which we're moving to right now. When you think about that framework, you have to know that the main objective is people. And the strategies are to grow givers, which means let's bring more people into our fold that would want to attach to what God's doing here inside of our church. And let's grow giving, which means let's really grow their hearts so that they're connected to the stories that they're a part of. And these 3 reports that are listed here are the 3 things that we think, if you're not going to manage to anything else all year long, manage to these 3 things, measure to these 3 things, inspect what you expect, and then set a goal and build your strategy accordingly. These 3 charts are your band composition, the retention of your tenured givers, not just top givers, all tenured givers, everybody, and how they can benefit, and the average age of your givers, so that you will be able to really be foundational for the church, not only now, but moving forward into the future as we embark upon what church is going to look like in the next several years. So let's start with band composition. And this report, let me just kind of narrate it for you real fast. If you are a user out of Mortarstone, you can find this underneath your report section, all givers, and you'll be able to look at this overview there. If you're not yet, you can obviously come back at the end. We'd love to be able to hook you up and give you this so that you can look at it. And some of you might be able to just do this in an Excel spreadsheet. This is simple and easy, and it's here for you, and we'd love for you to have it. So this particular band composition shows you the process of what people are giving. When you're looking at the left-hand side of your screen, it shows you bands 1 through 5, which are just the dollar amounts at which people are giving. So all the way from $1 to $10,000 or more is what you're looking at here. Bands 1 through 5, it ranges from $1 of what people are giving all the way to $10,000 or more. And then if you move over to the very next spot, it shows you how many households inside of each band are giving to your church and the dollars that they're giving. And then let's move to the far right-hand side of your screen, which shows you the actual percentage of households that are giving towards your general fund tithe and offering budget, and then the giving that is coming from them. So you can kind of really weigh this all out and look at some of the demographics of the things that you know, of the backgrounds of what's going on inside of your church, where you're located, and kind of the community in which you live. And this band composition report helps you to understand very clearly where you might need to put some of those discipleship education pieces into place, and what you might need to be able to speak about when you're communicating with your givers, whether you are assimilating them into the process or you're trying to grow their hearts by sharing where the church is at and how stories can be impacted. So, Brenda, I'd love for you to share what your thoughts were on this report and how we've used it to drive the strategies and the milestones at CVC.
Yeah, I love this report. This was when we go back in time, 2017, when we were starting the ministry, and fast forward a couple years to when I brought Megan in to talk to us, which would have been 2020. I took and by the way, this is not CVC data that you're looking at. This is test data. I took the demo database into an elder meeting to show them, if we move forward with Mortarstone, what types of things we'd be able to do. It was this report that was the aha moment, like the eyes got real big and what? Because it was our data that I was showing them. And it was enlightening, and it was surprising. And it was the thing that we said, we have to work with Mortarstone. So why do I love this so much? Because, we don't have time to talk about it all, but it tells us so much. If I look at this for CVC, I can see that 40% of our givers give 90% of our contributions. 40% of our givers give 90% of our contributions, which then says 60% of our givers give 10% of our contributions. Why is that important? Because that shows us how much work we have to disciple people and where we need to focus our attention. And I will point out that when you see number of households on here, this is not the total number of households in your church. This is the total number of households giving. And so looking at some other things, some research that Mortarstone has done, and some things that I've looked at, we're estimating about 40% of our attendees is in what I call a band 0, which gives nothing. So they don't even show up on this report. Oh, we have work to do. That's what we saw as a church, and that's what we still see as a church. We're still working toward that. So this was really valuable information for us to have. And, we use it. This is the first thing that I look at when I go into Mortarstone. So it's been extremely valuable to us.
And I think that the thing to remember here is that, that saying, Rome wasn't built in a day. So when we have an aha moment like that, then the work really begins when we start diving in and starting to understand, what are the hurdles that our givers are having to overcome in their everyday life, that also could be, if they were affected by the truth of what the word of God says, could maybe help them to propel themselves forward in this area of stewardship and generosity in their lives through that discipleship lens. The byproduct is everybody wins. It's a win-win-win situation. So when you come back and you're managing this report and you're looking at it after you've implemented strategies, your goal would be to see some of this shift as you've done some of the discipleship classes, as you've given an annual sermon series, as you've started casting vision of where the church is headed. You would hope that this would be something that would shift in that regard. So the band composition is one of the #1 reports that you can measure to this year. And if you're going to be looking at reports, start here. This is where your roadmap begins. Know the composition of your giving and your givers so that you can make some adjustments towards that. The next report that we recommend that you really start to get familiar with is the retention of your tenured givers. because everybody wants to have people remain. It's the same principles inside of business. You want to attract new clients and you don't want your old clients to leave. It's the same thing here inside of the church. We want our givers to remain and we want to help them to be healthy and strong where they're at. So this report of retention of tenured givers shows where people are coming in, whether they are coming in strong, they are lagging behind, or they are falling short. We're looking at a 24-month time frame on this report inside of Mortarstone, and it's saying, hey, from last year to this year, where are we at? Where are these people at? People who were giving last year at this time in comparison to where people are giving at this year at this time. Are they coming in strong, which may present something that you can come alongside them and cheer them along with, like, that's awesome, something good must be happening in your life? Are they lagging behind, which could pose like a ministry opportunity? Or are they falling short, which really could pose the opportunity for discipleship or just care for that overall part of your flock in general? So Brenda, you talked about stories. You talked about briefly about doing an annual sermon series, and you talked about the family vision nights. I would love if at this point you could talk about maybe the annual sermon series impact the most, and potentially the reason why you created a case for support for this group of givers as well as others.
Yeah, so early, when it was around Easter of last year, we did a sermon series on generosity. And when I look at the metrics, we did a number of things. So it's hard to point to one thing. I will also mention that in January of last year, we released a theology of stewardship and generosity, which is a tremendous document. And it's short, very succinct, basically says God owns it all. We don't own anything. Our job is to manage what he's given us and be good stewards. That's the basis of it. There's about 8 pages that say that, but that's what it says. That was the underlying probably motive for the generosity series. So the generosity series was based on the theology, was taught over 3 weeks. We also started our vision nights last year, and our vision/family nights. We started really focusing on doing stories every week. So it's hard for me to point to one thing when I look at the statistics, but when I go back to the band report and I see over the last 2 years that the average giving per household has increased a cumulative 24% from 2 years ago, it's because of all those things that we've been able to do. And take it back to when I originally mentioned that first engagement with Mortarstone and with Horizons, where we got the report and the 13 milestones we set out to accomplish. It's because of those things that we did that we're seeing this dramatic. I think it's dramatic because it doubled from the previous 2 years. It doubled the increase in the average household per giving by doing those things. So currently, we're about to release, I'll throw this in, Megan, a case for support, which has been under construction for 1.5 years. I'm hoping we're just a couple weeks away from finalizing that. But it's a document that will, again, communicate. It's one of our communication tools to the body. Here's CVC. Here's who we are. Here's where we've been. Here's what we've done. Here's what we want to do. Here are the things that we will do if you continue to bless CVC with your giving. And that's going to be our next communication document that will be coming out shortly.
Absolutely. I love that because you addressed those things. You hit the numbers that came from it. So the increase in giving through tenured givers, that is a goal. and we were able to measure that outcome. We had to apply things to it. We had to put effort into those things, but the output was the tenure givers did grow in the dollars that they were giving. And that is one of our overall objectives that we were trying to reach, right? Grow
Right.
givers. So that's a huge win. And Brenda, you hit on those two documents that I think really drive and gird not just stewardship and generosity ministry, they drive and gird the entire church, because everybody wants more money to do more ministry inside of the different departments that we have. But that has to come from a pure heart of saying, well, we're all a part. Whether we're giving 2 cents or $2 million, we all have a part to play in this overall story. So why should we give is your theology of stewardship and generosity. And why should we give through the local church is your case for support. And those are two things that help individual givers, whether they have never given. So we are trying to grow givers, all the way to if they've actually been at the church for a while, but have forgotten why we are supposed to be called to give through the local church. And what we're doing is a collective body of Christ to grow the kingdom in the cities and the states and the nations that we are called to. So those two things really help with this. And this is managing that. You can take this even to an operational standpoint for those of you who want something like a task or a to-do or a thought process, and you can measure, are we doing well by shoring up people who are falling short? If people were falling short, were we able to reach out to them, and did that impact their giving? So this is absolutely a way to measure what we want to measure. The very third report that we think is key for you to grow in 2023 and beyond is to begin to understand the average age of your givers and the giving amounts that they're giving. Typically, you can think of, everybody might have heard of a bell curve, right? And when we're thinking about givers and the ages that they are and the dollars of income that maybe they're earning in their own individual lives, we think about 20-year-olds starting out probably not making very much at all, right? But then as a 20-year-old grows and as a 20-year-old matures and as they're discipled and they go on with their walk of life, they start to have career advancements, which earns them more income, in which case, if they're being discipled, they start to give to the church. They hit those peak earning careers around peak earning years around age 50 to 60, which is where they accumulate most of their wealth. Most people in a giving journey or an individual journey accumulate most of the wealth that they have in their 50s and 60s. That wealth, they typically think from a secular standpoint, is so that they can retire and they can live off of the wealth that they created. And that is true. We want to help people to have a mindset, though, that their giving does not have to be a byproduct of the income statement that they have. Because in the accumulation of the years that we live on this earth, we put things on our balance sheet. And if we are discipling people well and we are teaching people well, then we are teaching them that God owns the whole balance sheet, not just the income statement in which they give not only to the church, but all the other organizations that are coming at them as well for their missions and visions. What we've found, though, inside of the church world is that our nonprofit competition, so to speak, and it's not really competition if we're all doing things for the kingdom. There are nonprofit competition that's not kingdom minded. So we want to be good stewards of where we're putting those dollars. What we found is that they have been really advancing in the philanthropic space of being able to teach people how to give from their balance sheet. And the secular world is doing an excellent job of teaching people how to give from their balance sheet. But the kingdom, which is where things are eternal, where the legacy that we leave on this earth matters not only now, but forever, has not done a very good job at discipling how to help people understand that there are real good opportunities to give from their balance sheet. So the first thing we have to do is understand what the demographics are inside of our own church. And if you're looking at this report, which is inside of Mortarstone, you can see that there are people who have an age demographic on the right, and then there's two sets of data, the prior year and the most recent year data, and the dollars that are attached to the different demographic of age. So you can see how that totals out into the cumulative general fund budget. Why is this important to look at? Because we want you to be able to know how to teach people to give from their balance sheet so that a bell curve doesn't hit your church while people are still being discipled over here. So I'd love, Brenda, for you to really hit hard on some of the things that CVC has started doing because of seeing this information.
Yeah, this was another aha moment for us when we saw this report. If you take a look at, again, this is sample data, but if you take a look at the households, the bottom half of this, you'll notice unknown that a large percentage of the households represented here, you don't know the age. And I just want to point that out because that's true for us as well. We don't require someone to give us their birth date in our core management system. But here's what I do know, and what we've been able to determine through this report. We know the age of 58% of the folks that are giving. So 58% of our giving households, I know the age. Why is that important? Well, because the next thing I looked at was how many of those are 50 or older, and I found 69% of those are 50 and older. To Megan's point, it was an awakening for us to go, we have a situation where, and I also know that that group, the 50 and older group of the ones I know the age for, that group is giving half of our operating income. What happens when the folks that are in the 70 plus are no longer with us? That's going to impact us significantly. So we then, because of that, started talking with Mortarstone about gift planning and how we can be better at communicating with the people that come to CVC, how they can be generous, not just with the 5% or so that sits in cash, but with the other 95% that sits in non-cash assets. And I'll give you an example. In our estate planning workshop, which we actually have been doing for as long as Generous Life's been around, we have some local attorneys that are very strong Christians that help us with that. And when they talk about estate planning, they throw out the opportunity for folks to create a charitable child. Instead of maybe you have 2 kids, you divide your estate into 3 pieces and you have a charitable child, and that charitable child could be the church. Everyone who heard that said, I've never heard that. I love that idea. No one's ever told me I could do that. And so it's just a matter, the secular world is asking, and the church hasn't done a good job of asking. And again, I really want to make sure that we're not coming across as, money hungry people. We're not. We are after people's hearts. So again, we want to make sure that people understand what God has said to them related to money and possessions, and give them an opportunity, if they so choose, if they feel led, to provide some of their non-cash assets to the church. So we have started down the path of gift planning with Mortarstone. We've added 2 new classes, the Generosity and Legacy Design workshop, which is actually a precursor to our estate planning. The way that we set it up is that the Generosity and Legacy Design workshop comes first, followed by estate planning, followed by tax smart giving. We also have through Mortarstone someone who is available to anyone at CVC to talk to them one-on-one, free of charge, about their personal situation and give them guidance. And it is a pastor who was a senior pastor for 36 years who happens to have some additional training in gift planning. So he does a great job of just having really caring conversations with people about their personal situations and not trying to move them in any particular direction, but helping them to understand what their options are. So we've started down that path. We have a ways to go. There are more things that we could do, but we're very excited to continue that in 2023 and offer even more opportunities for our people to learn more about how gift planning could impact the kingdom.
Yeah, it's so fun. All of these things are so very important. And this part of what we're doing, it is legacy and impact, and there is gift. And if you're watering people's hearts on the front part by just simply offering the education and communication, God does the work. And we just have to say, okay, then how can we make this easy for you? And the easy part comes in by offering the classes, the education, and then actual practical next steps that people can take. The next step of being able to meet with somebody, the next step of being able to build their own individual giving plan. These are all very important things that we as a church can begin to share with people inside of our congregation who need to understand this from a biblical perspective, not from a secular perspective. Because the truth of the matter is that God does own it all. He owns all of our balance sheet. And we, as good stewards, have the opportunity on this side of heaven to have that prayer opportunity to connect with him. What should we be doing with that which you've entrusted into our care? So all three of these reports that we kind of have gone over the past 45 minutes or so of this webinar are managing back to that key objective. How do we grow givers and how do we grow giving? And all of that is done through strategy lenses that connect to people in a way that we can tangibly see if the results are coming to pass. So at this time, I would love to, I know we've got some questions and answers. I'm going to go ahead and ask if anybody has any other questions, can you please put them either in the chat or the question and answer session? And Brenda's going to spend maybe 3 or 4 minutes giving her top advice of things that she has done and would say to continue to do in 2023. And then we'll go ahead, Nikki, you can come back on and you can throw us out a couple of questions. So Brenda, would you share with us some of the top advice that you have?
Yeah, sure, Megan. I will say this. I did not grow up in the stewardship generosity world. My career was in IT consulting in human resource systems. So when I joined as the director of the Generous Life Ministry, I did not come with a deep background in this. So I had to get educated. So my first bit of advice is get educated and build a network that can help support you. I went to the Christian Stewardship Network Forum. I shook the hands of every board of directors person that was there. I scheduled one-on-one conference calls with them to just pick their brains. I looked for anybody that could help me figure out how to get started. And CSN did give me the project plan I needed. I'm a project manager by trade, gave me the project plan I needed to start the ministry. So that was really valuable to me, along with connecting with vendors that are out there that can be of assistance, like Mortarstone, like Horizons. There's so many other vendors in this space. They do come to the CSN forum as well, but there's many opportunities to connect with vendors, get on mailing lists, attend webinars, those types of things. Just don't reinvent the wheel. Look at what others have done, leverage what they have done. And that's the whole purpose of the Ohio Stewardship Network that we started, so that we can help each other, so that we're not all starting from ground zero. We develop a class like Managing Money God's Way at CVC. I give it out to the 25 churches that are part of the Ohio Stewardship Network. They can use it as it is or change it to whatever they want it to be, but at least they're not starting from scratch. Number 2, enlist the support of your elders and the leadership team at your church. Without that, you won't go anywhere. The senior pastors have to be behind this or you'll make very little progress. It has to be, I like to talk about it as being in the water, that generosity and stewardship is not a thing that sits over here on the sideline. It's just a ministry on the org chart. It's the whole org chart. Every ministry, partner with every ministry in your church. Help the other ministry directors understand how generosity and stewardship affect their particular areas, women, children, youth, young adults, everyone, and build a strong team. We have a really strong small core team for Generous Life. I'm really excited to be working with. We always need more people, and we're always looking for more people, and I'm looking to grow the team this year even more. But seek out others who have passion for this within your church that could come alongside you and help in this effort, because nobody can do this alone. It's a big task, but it's a fun task, and it's been the joy for me to be able to do this for the past 5 years.
Yeah, those are all excellent pieces of advice. This webinar is being recorded, so there was a lot of things, little nuggets that you guys have been probably power packed with. Feel free to come back to this webinar and watch it, fast forward to the things that you really want to hear. We have just maybe 2 minutes left before I will say we'll close down. Is there maybe, Nikki, one question that we could answer before we have to jump off and give everybody back the remainder of their day?
I think there's 2 questions that we can answer maybe pretty quickly that I think were pretty popular. First, it's going back to the beginning there, talking about your lapsed giving, Brenda, and your lapsed givers. When you guys reach out to them, what is your strategy? Is it a phone call that recognizes that they've stopped giving, or is it just a relational call? What is your strategy for lapsed givers?
It's a relational call. It's not to call them and say, where's your money? We don't do that. That's not the reason for the call. It's to find out if they're okay.
Okay, great. And then along that same question, after the phone call and you've made that connection, if you've made that connection with them, what's the next step you guys take?
Well, it depends on the nature of the conversation. I had during COVID, I had a lot of conversations with people. We called everybody in the church because of COVID, and that was great to be able to do that. And so many of our people, once you have a conversation, you hear that, geez, somebody lost their job, and you know that their heart is to give. I mean, just in the conversation, you don't talk about giving, but you just get off the call, you know where they're at. There were very few people where I felt like we needed to have a pastor follow up because there was a concern about maybe there was a medical issue or something going on in the family that we needed to come alongside of them. But so it depends on, it's a hard question to answer. It depends on the nature of the call.
Right. And did you rely completely on your staff for that, or did you guys have volunteers that reached out?
When we did those particular calls, that was all staff. And right now it's all staff. I don't have any volunteers making care calls right now. Would love to do that. But again, that's something you really have to vet the people that you're going to have making those calls.
Okay. The other question that came in is, you said that I think it was 24% growth that you've seen in giving. Was that over one particular band, or was it across all the bands? Was there one segment that you saw more growth in?
It was the average giving per household across all the bands increased 24% since we brought on Mortarstone.
Okay. Great. All right. And then let me see if there was somebody also asked real quick. I know we're a minute over, but I think it'll be what kind of communication strategy do you use with your core givers? Like, do you reach out with letters? Do you make phone calls as well? What's your strategy with them?
Yeah, we've not started making phone calls to the core givers. All of the things that I mentioned earlier related to the stories, the family vision meetings, the contribution statements, the letters that I write that go out with the contribution statements, thanking them for their involvement, giving them more stories. Those are the types of things that are going out right now to the core givers.
Great. All right. Well, I think that's the majority of the questions that came in right there. Thank you, Brenda, and thank you, Megan. Any last bits of anything before we end this webinar?
I think we can just end with saying, we bless you, our friends. We are co-laboring alongside of you. We want nothing but the absolute best for you and your families and all the families that you are shepherding and getting the opportunity to connect with week in and week out. So bless you and all of your future ministry this year.
All right. It's been a pleasure to be with you, Megan, and I'm so excited to see what happens with everybody else on the call. So for those of you who are participating, if your ministry is impacted by this, let us know.
Thank you so much, Brenda, for being with us. Thank you, Nikki, so much for putting this together. And thank you, everyone. Have a lovely rest of your day.
Thank you. All right. Goodbye,
Bye.
everybody.